You, my friends, are on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Joining us now live in Cairo in the Middle East, our man in the Middle East, Eddie Yeranian, just got back from an emergency visit to the dentist in Cairo and joining us now anyway. Eddie, how's your teeth?
I'm feeling better, John. Thank you for being patient with me.
I'm always patient, Eddie, especially when you have tooth problems and you got Novocaine and all that. Now, is everything okay? You got your crown back in? You good to go?
I think I'm good to go. Yeah, I think I'm good to go.
You're good to go. Let's get to the Israeli-Gaza Strip situation. A lot of people saying, okay, the Israeli military, have they overreacted? We got 100 Palestinians dead, innocent Palestinians. They didn't fire any rockets, no mortars. Yet they did fly over the wall, the border, these fire kites, and they were flinging rocks and slingshots. But, 100 people dead, that's a lot of people dead. No Israeli soldiers dead. Did the Israeli military overreact here? What do you think?
Well, no, I don't think so. And I'm going to take a lot of flack for that because I can't condone killing people, but it's a lot like what happened here in Cairo with the Muslim Brotherhood. They rammed their people into the police and the army, and then they died. A lot of them died, and then they blamed the police and the army. If they had not sent their supporters charging into the Israeli police and the border fence, they wouldn't have had those casualties. So the leadership obviously wanted to have casualties, obviously wanted to have blood, and I say that because I know the mentality of those people. In fact, Ismail Haniyeh, the Palestinian leader, Hamas leader that is, in Gaza, gave a speech before this all happened, and he said he was going to have these protests against the Israelis, and that they were going to jump the border fence. So obviously the Israeli police were expecting them to jump the border fence, and perhaps they would have if the police had not fired at them so vigorously, which is not to condone firing at anyone vigorously, but it could have gotten out of hand with more than just casualties if they had gone over the fence.
Okay, what did you think of the Israeli defending the Israelis, the statement by our UN ambassador, Nikki Haley? Do you think she was spot on or not?
I heard her. I don't think she was wrong. The problem is there is no sympathy for Israel in the UN or the Security Council. So ultimately, whether we defend the Israelis or criticize them, and you can probably do a bit of both, because I know they do overreact. I have seen them overreact myself in Lebanon, on the border with Lebanon. But at the same time, if those people had gotten over the border fence, it could have been a lot bloodier because they would have had to react more forcefully, and they could have, if the militants in the back had seen them going over the border fence, they could have started firing rockets as well. And you never know. They've got tunnels under the border. The people could have started coming out of the tunnels, and it could have been a very serious attack. So while I don't want to condone it, I don't necessarily think they overreacted.
Well, look, Edward, it's easy for us to sit here on the sidelines and say what they should and shouldn't have done. And I said this on Al Jazeera the other day. It's really easy to make these judgments, but you don't know. I mean, when you're faced with that many people amassing on your border with the tunnels, and these tunnels are not crude little things where somebody has a shovel and they dig a little tunnel. I mean, these are prefab tunnels. These are concrete reinforced. You can drive trucks through these. And so they're all over the place. The Israelis don't even know where they are. And so, it's easy to sit back and be an armchair quarterback and say, what the Israeli military should or shouldn't have done. But their job is to protect their people. One of the best statements I've heard in a while was Wolf Blitzer. This is about a week ago. Eddie, he interviewed the Saudi foreign minister. I can't remember his name. You would probably know it. But he was...
Adel Jubeir.
Yeah, and he's very good on TV. He's very young. He doesn't have a beard, which was shocking to me. No mustache, no beard, no facial hair. Clean-cut guy. and speaks great English, probably studied in the West, speaks flawless English. And he said, look, as long as the Iranians are firing rockets over our cities, what do you think we're going to do? We're going to protect our cities. And that means we're going to do whatever it takes, up to and including using whatever military options that we have or might have. And he said, shooting rockets over our cities is not exactly a sign of friendship. I really thought that was a great statement. And he said that on Wolf Blitzer, he says, it's not a sign of friendship, right? I mean, so when you're firing, rocks and slingshots and kite bombs, that's not a sign of friendship. And so maybe they overreacted. It's easy to blame them. But Eddie, the White House saying Israel not to blame for the Gaza deaths. They're also saying it has nothing to do with the U.S. Embassy moving to Jerusalem, which is an absurd statement. I don't know where they got that. Obviously, that's connected. But let's go to Hamas. What's their involvement here?
Political points. They're at loggerheads with the Fatah group, the president Mahmoud Abbas. The Egyptians have tried to get them to negotiate and hand over power in the Gaza Strip. They're not supposed to be in power in the Gaza Strip. The leader, Ismail Haniyeh, said specifically that he was going to try to break over the border fence. Mahmoud Zahar, another Palestinian Hamas leader in Gaza, said that they were going to, that the Hamas people were backing up these demonstrations. It also took place on what the Palestinians call their Nakba, their defeat in 1947. The Israelis look at it as their victory, their independence. So they always try to score points on that particular day, whether the embassy there's an American embassy moving or not. And Hamas is in trouble. The Palestinian Fatah movement has cut back on funding. They don't have enough money to pay their police. They don't have enough money to pay their civil servants. And the Egyptians are down their throats to force them to hand over power. So they need to score points against Israel with their people. Otherwise, they're in big trouble.
So basically, this is a political operation being put on by Hamas. Why has the mainstream media ignored Hamas's involvement in this?
I really don't know why they cover what they want to cover. I think they have agendas. I think anything that doesn't fit their agenda in terms of wanting to give Palestine a two-state solution, and it's not even a question of a two-state solution, because perhaps there is a viable two-state solution, but they want to have a two-state solution that works for them, that fits their particular criteria. And the media, well, after this last election, how much they ignore some of the facts and ignore some of the truth, if not a lot of the truth. I see it myself in terms of how they cover Syria, how they cover Libya, how they've covered Egypt since 2011. So I wouldn't put my trust in the mainstream media.
The Washington Post reported, speaking of the mainstream media, that organizers of the protest in the Gaza Strip went so far as to tell people protesting, and this was Hamas, that they said they wanted them to burst through the fence because they said Israeli soldiers were fleeing their positions, when in reality they were getting reinforcements. Critics in Israel said in the Post that they didn't care about Palestinian lives, but it's Hamas that's continually endangering them. And then one of the protesters, quoted by a reporter in the Washington Post, said, "We're excited to storm and get inside whatever is possible to kill, throw stones," as protesters. So, you've got protesters saying to news media that they want to get over the fence and put Israelis to death. What do you expect the Israelis to do?
Well, I've heard that on Arab media. I've heard the Arab media that supports the Palestinians specifically quote them on breaking over the border fence. And you also know that Hamas gets money from Iran. It's supported also by Turkey and Qatar. Qatar has cut back since they've been under pressure by Saudi Arabia. They still support them. And Iran would like to put Israel under pressure. They've been having a lot of trouble with getting fired. Their people have been being fired on by Israel inside Syria. The Israelis have killed a number of Iranian Revolutionary Guards at a drone base, at another air base in the north of Syria over the last several months, in addition to getting into a rocket war on the Golan Heights. So anything that can put Israel under pressure is a plus for Iran.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We're with Eddie Yeranian. He's live in Cairo. He's our man in the Middle East. Been with me for, Eddie, 8 years. Can you believe it? Right? Time flies. 8 years. Like, what have we been doing all our lives, talking to each other for 8 years? Ed, let's get to the potential peace now. You got Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, in charge of trying to negotiate something. Look, you've been there covering this a long time. A lot of people feel that a two-state solution, if you will, is the only meaningful potential peace there could ever be there. Then there's others that say the problem with Hamas is they don't want a two-state solution. The Palestinian leadership doesn't really want a peace because their power is derived from incessant protests, which is a little bizarre, but that's one school of thought in that region. Can we ever achieve peace through a two-state solution there?
I seriously doubt it, but I think it's going to come under the form of the United Nations imposing a solution. It's not going to be a good solution for the Israelis, and it's going to come at a point where the U.S. Is obliged to go with the herd at the UN, and it's going to have the blessing of the European nations, and it's going to be unfavorable to Israel because no matter what solution you have on the ground, you always have new reasons for protests that the Islamic militant groups like Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, will come up with, and they'll try to just gain more territory and put the Jewish state under pressure. And I don't say this as a great fan of Israel. I say this as a journalist. I say these are my observations after 30 years.
Ed, when you say that it will not be something that Israel will like, okay, so to speak, define that. Like, what would be a solution that the Israelis would find untenable or not palatable?
Well, once you lose control of Jerusalem, historically it was the Jordanians that closed the gates of the old city in 1948. It wasn't the Israelis. The Jordanians closed the city until 1967 when Israel recaptured the West Bank, and the Jews were not allowed to pray inside the old city. And, no matter what the Palestinian, what their claim to Jerusalem may be, if they prevent the Jews from praying there, that's half of their obligation to the other side of the equation. So if they're not able to respect that, and they haven't been able to historically, they didn't historically, it would be untenable for the Israelis to lose control of Jerusalem, the old city, that is.
Well, how does the U.S. Embassy there change that scenario?
It really doesn't, except for the media relations. It was probably a bad media play to do that. But the embassy is in West Jerusalem, which is the Jewish side of the city. It was not the part that was controlled by the Arabs, by Jordan from 1948 to 1967. Part of it is in the no man's land, the West Bank per se. So clearly, it was a provocation that could have backfired, may have backfired. I don't know. It was a wrong decision, and only history will tell whether it was the right thing to do. But certainly, it played into the hands of the Hamas movement and their allies in Iran and elsewhere in the Gulf. And it's right at the moment, Israel has lost its media points, and the Palestinians have scored. I think that's the only way to look at it.
So you could see, I've only got 20 seconds here, Edward. You could see a two-state solution that divides the city of Jerusalem, much like after the Second World War they divided Berlin.
I could. It's happened before. It's just ultimately it could backfire, and the Jews will find themselves with no Wailing Wall at which to pray.
All right, we're out of time. Eddie Yeranian, thanks for being with us. Always appreciate your insight.